Well, let's get going with no further ado. So, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the first of two community meetings presented by the Napa County Groundwater Sustainability Agency on the Groundwater Sustainability Fee. Thank you for being here. I'm Jamison Crosby, Natural Resources Conservation Manager for the county, and I'm here with county staff, Brendan McGovern and Nick Featherston, and our technical consultant, Ryan Aston of SCI Consulting. Before we begin, I would like to set a few expectations for this afternoon's virtual meeting. This is an informational session intended to provide an overview of the project, share relevant information, and answer questions. While we recognize that attendees may have a range of perspectives on the topic, the focus of today's meeting is on understanding the project and addressing questions from the community. We ask that all participants engage respectfully, avoid interrupting others, and keep comments and questions focused on the information being presented. Maintaining a professional and courteous environment will help us make the best use of everyone's time and ensure the meeting runs smoothly. Next slide, please. There we go. Our agenda today is shown here. We have a presentation for items 1 through 5, which should take between 30 and 35 minutes, and then we'll open it up to Q&A from the audience. Once we get to the Q&A portion of the meeting, if you would like to ask a question, please raise your hand, and our clerk will call your name and unmute you so that you can pose your question. Please try to keep your questions as brief as possible to ensure we're able to help everyone. And of course, if you think of something after the meeting is over or we run out of time, we'll provide our contact information at the beginning and the end so that you can contact us afterwards. So with no further ado, I will hand it over to Mr. Aston to begin the presentation.
Thank you, Jamison, and good afternoon, everybody. As Jamison noted, I'm Ryan Aston. I'm with SCI Consulting Group, and I assisted the county in developing the fee that we're discussing today. We're going to walk through some key elements of the fee today. First, with a little bit of background and sort of the purpose of the fee. We'll touch on the budget and the revenue requirement, the fee structure and methodology, and then procedures and next steps. And procedures and next steps relates mostly to some of the potential changes in fee calculation based on those that may dry farm or have pulled some planted acreage out, that sort of thing. So we'll get into some of those details as well. The first thing we wanted to note today is really the fee applicability, or who is subject to the fee. And in general, you're subject to the fee if you are a groundwater user and if your property is located within the Napa Valley subbasin. And we have that picture on the right there that shows the county, and then in the blue there, the subbasin itself. The other caveat here is that if you receive water from a municipal service provider or some other service provider, you would not be subject as well. We are charging public water systems and water providers directly for any groundwater they may extract. For parcels that straddle the subbasin boundary that may be part in and part out, the real kind of differentiator here is if your well is located inside the boundary, then the fee applies. Now, the caveat there is that in most cases, well locations are not known. So what we're working with at this point is if 50% or more of your parcel is inside, then you're considered inside the subbasin. But we want to hear from those who feel their well may be outside of the subbasin. And then the people can be potentially removed from the fee, excuse me. If you're unsure, you can reach out via the email address here. I have that posted at the end as well. You can reach out to the county and we'll help you. But we also have instructions that we're going to provide towards the end of this meeting for using an interactive GIS map on the county website and how to determine whether your parcel is within the boundary or on that boundary as well. So we wanted to provide assistance regarding this issue. Again, we'll go into more detail later in the meeting. You can always reach out if you're unsure. So moving on, I wanted to touch on sort of the fee background and the purpose. So this is really kind of the framework that the fee is built around. And to that end, I wanted to touch a little bit on what the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, or SGMA, is. So SGMA was passed in 2014, and it's essentially California's first statewide regulatory framework for managing groundwater basins. A couple of important notes here is that SGMA required the formation of what are called Groundwater Sustainability Agencies, or GSAs, to manage groundwater basins. It also required the development of groundwater sustainability plans, or GSPs, to guide basin management. So I know there's a lot of acronyms here, wanted to clear up some of those important ones right away. Napa County GSA formed in 2019, and the Napa Valley Subbasin GSP was approved by the California Department of Water Resources in January 2023. So since 2019, development and implementation of the GSP has been funded by grants and by the Napa County General Fund. To that end, fee development began several years ago in February 2023. This process has included exploration of different fee options, some preliminary rate scenarios, and presentations to the GSA board. The real purpose of this fee is it's intended to generate funding to support the cost of implementing the GSP, which includes state-mandated groundwater monitoring and reporting. So that's a big part of this as well. Next, I want to touch on the budget and the revenue requirement, and those are two different things, which I'll explain in just a moment here. This is the budget developed for the fee study. The intention here was to develop what is a typical budget, what is the revenue needed to continue to implement this program in the Napa Valley Subbasin. So this is based on projected annual GSA costs. This represents the total estimated annual expenses, but as I mentioned a moment ago, that's different from the revenue need or the revenue requirement applied to fees, in that other funding, such as contributions from the Napa County General Fund, can reduce the revenue need that is applied to fees. And I'll get into that in a little more detail in a moment, but we do have a contribution from Napa County that is a part of this equation that is not completely finalized at the moment, but we know there is going to be a contribution from the county general fund that reduces this overall revenue need. Looking at this budget, we have this broken down into some subcategories. At the top there, we have administrative costs. So this includes agency administration. It also includes operational coordination. At the bottom, we have professional services, and this relates in part to a lot of that state-mandated monitoring and reporting that the GSA is required to conduct. But it also relates to management actions. So these are sort of projects and administrative efforts that are intended to implement the GSP and ensure sustainability in the subbasin. Moving on to fee structure and methodology. So I want to kind of explain a little bit of the nuts and bolts here. We have essentially three groundwater user classes, as we're calling them, within the subbasin. These include agricultural groundwater users. So of course, these are agricultural irrigators that extract groundwater. These were identified largely by looking at all parcels within the subbasin that contain planted crop acreage as sourced from the Napa County Assessor's Office. So this is something that not all counties have, but we felt that it was the most efficient way to identify where there is crop acreage, and that is largely how these parcels were identified. For agricultural groundwater users, the fee basis here is that they are charged based on that amount of planted crop acreage. Next, we have self-supplied groundwater users. So these are domestic or commercial property owners extracting groundwater. This user class is largely rural domestic groundwater users. These are designated by identifying all parcels with county use codes indicating water use that lie outside of public water system service areas. So essentially, all parcels are assigned a use code by the county. That use code may indicate, for example, residential or commercial, that sort of thing. So we used those use codes to identify these parcels. All of them within the subbasin that are not served by water service areas are included in this user class. For this user class, the charge basis is a bit different. This is just a simple charge per parcel for these users. And lastly, we have public water system groundwater users. So these are generally municipal and small water systems that extract groundwater and then provide it to their constituency or their community. These are designated by simply identifying all water systems within the subbasin. Water systems are registered and cataloged with the state. And because for this user class, we actually have some hard data here, we have groundwater extraction data, this user class is charged based on the amount of groundwater extracted, measured in acre feet. So these are sort of the three primary sort of sections, if you will, of the fee, or the three different types of charges that we have in place. Next, I wanted to touch on this idea of the county contribution in a little more detail. I mentioned this a moment ago when we were discussing the budget, but wanted to provide a little more detail here. So per the GSA board, the purpose of a continued county contribution, and I say continued because as I shared before, these efforts have generally been funded by the Napa County General Fund to date. So this continued county contributions purpose is threefold, really. It's to reduce the revenue need and rates, to reduce the burden on self-supplied groundwater users, and to provide financial stability. So that's sort of the framework with which we're working on this county contribution. We have a tentative county contribution in the amount of $500,000. This is what was included in the fee study. That $500,000 is used in several ways. One is $300,000 is applied broadly to reduce revenue need and fee rates. $100,000 is applied to self-supplied users, and $100,000 is used for a reserve fund and fee waivers for eligible self-supplied users. And I'll get into that in a little more detail a bit later on. One important thing to note, the county is in the middle of budget hearings, and there is some discussion, and the county is currently considering an additional contribution utilizing fund balance from last fiscal year. If this does take place, then that would further reduce the fee rates. So again, earlier when I differentiated between the budget or the cost itself and then the revenue need or the revenue requirement applied to fees, this is something that affects that, right? An increase in that county contribution would reduce the revenue need applied to the fee rates and then reduce the fee rates themselves. One other note about the reserve is capped at 15% of the total annual budget. And then excess reserves, any excess reserves would be used the following year to reduce that fee rate going forward. The county does have some flexibility there and can cap that at lower than 15%, but we sort of have this safeguard built into that reserve in and of itself. I want to get into the actual fee rates themselves next. So those three user classes and how the fee rates work. The rates established by the fee study are the maximum rates that can be levied under the adopted fee. So essentially, they are the ceiling. You can think of them as the ceiling. Several factors could reduce rates prior to tax bill preparation in any given year. And a couple key ones here are an increase in the county contribution, which I just mentioned, that is currently being considered by the GSA board. Another factor is a reduction in the expected amount of planted acreage that is dry farmed or irrigated with alternative water sources. So on the next slide, I'm going to get into the agricultural user rate calculation, where we have kind of a couple different pieces to that. We essentially baked in an assumption to the amount of planted acreage that is either dry farmed or irrigated with alternative water sources. And if we don't use up all that wiggle room, then the fee rate would come down a little more as well. So moving on to that agricultural user rate calculation, as I mentioned, there are a couple different parts to this. We have essentially a base rate and then an additional rate or supplemental rate. So the base rate per planted acre applies to all planted crop acres within the subbasin. So we have a dollar amount divided by the total plant acres, and we come up with $38.58. So again, that applies to all planted crop acres. We then have an additional rate per groundwater irrigated acre. So this applies to planted acreage that is irrigated with groundwater. It does not apply to users who dry farm or primarily use alternative water sources. And you can see that that amount is an additional $60.16. So going, and I apologize, I have some highlight here to add. So going down to the bottom for a groundwater irrigated acre, a planted crop acre that is irrigated with groundwater, we simply sum those two together and we come up with a maximum rate of $98.74. So a couple different pieces to this, and we do have some more information to discuss later about how we're going to recalculate fees for those that dry farm or primarily use surface water or another water source. This was mentioned on the postcards that were sent out, and we're going to provide a little more detail on how that process works here before we wrap up today. The next rate is the self-supplied user rate. So again, this is a per parcel charge. So we have this subset of parcels that we've identified as either residential or small commercial operations that rely on wells, on groundwater. And we just have a simple per parcel rate for these instances. So as you can see there on the screen, that rate is $62.58 per parcel. One thing to note here, we do have a fee waiver request available. It's based on area median income. Any fee waivers will be covered by revenue from the Napa County General Fund, not from other ratepayers. But that is available, and we're going to discuss that in more detail a little later on as well, whether you may qualify for that if you're interested and how that process works. The last part of this is the public water system rate calculation. So I mentioned earlier that self-supplied or residential parcels that rely on water system water are not included. And that is in part because we are charging those water systems directly for any groundwater that they extract. So all public water systems extracting groundwater are required to report that information to the California Department of Drinking Water. So we have groundwater extraction information for these entities. These entities include larger municipal systems, smaller community systems, and many wineries as well are registered as public water systems. Because we have extraction data for these entities, we are charging by the acre foot, so per acre foot of groundwater extracted. And you can see here that rate comes out to $129.87 per acre foot as the maximum rate there. So these are, again, sort of some of the nuts and bolts here of how this fee works. I wanted to next dive into some of the procedures and next steps, particularly as they relate to some of the changes in fee calculation that we anticipate making before finalizing our charge list essentially this summer. I referenced a couple of these already, but just to kind of give you a more comprehensive list, changes to fee calculation may be warranted based on claims of several things. One is dry farming, which I mentioned earlier. Dry farmers would only pay the base rate, not the additional rate. Use of alternative water sources as well. So if your primary water source is surface water or some other source of water, you would only pay the base rate. Another important one is vine removal or a reduction in planted acreage. So we'll talk a little bit about that. But if you have removed planted acreage, we want to know that so that we can calculate your fee based on the remaining planted acreage or the updated number or updated amount of planted acreage on your parcel. And lastly, of course, any errors in the database or wells that may be located outside of the subbasin for boundary parcels. The deadline to submit claims of these different changes to fee calculation is July 10th, 2026. And I'm going to go into more detail on each of these and kind of how they work. So the first one I wanted to discuss is dry farming. So as I mentioned before, if a portion of your cropped acreage or planted acreage is dry farmed, you will only pay the base rate of $38.58 per planted acre on that dry farmed acreage. The same is true if if all of your planted acreage is dry farmed. So in that case, you would only pay the $38.58 and you would not be charged the $60.16 additional per acre that applies to groundwater irrigated acreage. The definition of dry farming that we are using here is provided by the California Sustainable Wine Growing Alliance. And that is a technique that relies solely on utilizing the water naturally present in the soil, captured by rain, to meet the needs of an established vine without irrigation. In a Mediterranean climate with dry summers, this requires capturing winter and spring rain. So that is sort of the definition we're working with here. Logistically, how this will work is identification of the property as dry farmed may come from a map developed by the California Sustainable Wine Growing Alliance. And or a field visit and eligibility verification. For that, we are working with the Napa County Resource Conservation District. So they will have staff members that will be involved to come verify dry farming practices on a case-by-case basis. The next thing I wanted to discuss in more detail was the use of alternative water sources. So in this case, similar to dry farming, if you use surface water or another non-groundwater source for more than 50% of your irrigation, then you will only pay the base rate of $38.58 per planted acre, and you would not be charged that additional $60.16. In this case, the GSA will be seeking verification of surface water access and use. So that may be requested by the GSA on a case-by-case basis to verify that a majority of irrigation is coming from alternative water sources. The next thing I wanted to discuss is changes in planted acreage. So we do realize that changes are occurring in the industry and that there is planted acreage being pulled out. And we want to be as responsive as we can to that. So a couple details here. We do source our planted acreage information from the Napa County Assessor, as I mentioned earlier. They maintain the most up-to-date parcel records for how much crop acreage exists on a given parcel. However, if you removed vines or made any other changes to planted acreage after January 1st, 2026, this may not be reflected in the most current county assessor data. So in this case, we want to hear from you so that we can recalculate the fee based on what is actually occurring on your property. Pending verification of changes to planted acreage, we would then recalculate fees and match what's going on. So again, January 1st, 2026 is sort of the cutoff for when their data is updated. Of course, if you have kind of in your records what the assessor's office has, and you want to compare that to what is occurring on your parcel, that would be a great way to ensure that what you are going to be charged on is accurate and what is actually happening on your property. The next thing I wanted to discuss is the self-supplied fee waiver. Now, I mentioned this earlier. This is an option available to self-supplied households, essentially rural residential households. And it is provided by, the ability to do this is provided by the Napa County General Fund, right? So these fee waivers are not funded by other fee payers, but funded directly from the general fund. And essentially, households with an annual income at or below 80% of Napa County's median income, which is adjusted for household size, so you're working with a different number depending on how many people are in your household, are eligible to apply for this fee waiver. So this would be a fee waiver for that $62 and change rate per parcel. In this case, applicants must provide their tax return showing their adjusted gross income for the most recent tax year. So in this case, it would be the 2025 tax year in order to verify that income. The next thing I wanted to discuss here, I mentioned earlier that we have available on the county website an interactive GIS map to determine whether your parcel is inside the subbasin or not. And for those of you that straddle the basin boundary, this might be particularly helpful as you can determine whether your well is inside or outside that boundary. Of course, a majority of parcels are going to either be inside or outside, but we do have boundary parcels that kind of straddle that line up and down the valley. So this map, again, is available online. We wanted to provide brief instructions here today, but of course, if you have any issue or run into any trouble accessing this or figuring out how to use it, please do feel free to reach out. And on our last slide here, I'm going to once again provide contact information so that you know who to reach out to. Essentially, so first you go to the web address to access the map. There's a little disclaimer acknowledgement that you have to check and hit OK. And then you open a pop-up window on that main page, or excuse me, that's how you get to the acknowledgement box. And then you proceed to the online public map from that first landing page. Moving on to how this actually works, the first thing is that you have to open the layer menu and turn on the subbasin layer. So this map does not automatically have the subbasin there, but it is accessible as one of the layers that's on the map. So to turn that on, you navigate to the upper right corner. You can see there on that bottom picture, circled on the top, there's that little image that has sort of some layers on top of each other. You open that up and you select the second icon from the left to turn on or off layers. The next step is to expand hydro layers. So when you open that, you'll see hydro layers as one of the options. You go ahead and check that off, and it's the 5th item down on that list. And then you turn on the Groundwater Sustainability Agency boundary. So the Groundwater Sustainability Agency boundary is the same as the subbasin boundary. The GSA covers that exact area, the subbasin area within the valley. At that point, a new menu appears, and you go down and you check that box associated with each item you need. So you're looking for the Groundwater Sustainability Agency boundary. You navigate down the menu list to the 9th item, and that's where you should see that. At that point, you should then have what you need on the screen, and there will be a little search box where you can type in your parcel number, and that will directly guide you, bring you on the map to where your parcel is. You can, of course, just scroll around, if you know where your parcel is in relation to what you're looking at on the map, and find it there. And essentially, if your parcel is within the blue shaded area that will be on the screen, that's that subbasin or GSA boundary, then you know that you're inside the basin. If your parcel is completely outside of that, then you know that you're outside. If you straddle that line, this is where the real indicator here is whether the well that you use is inside or outside the subbasin. And again, you can always reach out to county staff for assistance with this, but we wanted to give you sort of a baseline understanding of how this map works, and how it can help you understand where your parcel is in relation to the subbasin boundary. The last thing I wanted to note here is if your parcel is within the blue shaded area, we have water system boundaries there as well, and that becomes relevant because, as I mentioned earlier, if you are receiving water from a municipal provider or some other type of provider, then you should not be charged. Now, you likely know that already, but that's one thing that the map can assist you with as well. The last thing I wanted to touch on here is the fee timeline. So to give you a sense kind of next steps and where we are in the process. As I mentioned a moment ago, the deadline to submit property owner fee calculation claims to the GSA is July 10th, 2026. So again, this relates to if you dry farm, if you've pulled planted acreage out, if you would like a fee waiver as a self-supplied user, or if you believe your well is outside the boundary. All of that information, you need to reach out to the GSA by July 10th. At that point in early July, the GSA will process updated crop acreage from the Napa County Assessor's Office. So we will be getting the most up-to-date information that we can from the Assessor's Office. But I do want to note that any claims of changes in planted acreage will be considered still. So that won't be cleared out by the new data we're going to get from them. As I mentioned earlier, their deadline is January 1st, 2026. So any changes that have occurred since then, we will incorporate. In mid-July, the GSA will then process all of the property owner fee calculation claims and will process parcel and ownership updates. So when we have kind of parcel splits, changes in ownership, that sort of thing, so that we're working with the most current data available prior to developing that final tax roll. On July 28th, 26, the GSA board will consider a resolution to finalize the rates and place charges on tax bills. So again, the rates I showed you earlier are the maximum rates. Those could be reduced either by an increase in the county contribution or by changes that come from this process of gathering more information about dry farming and other practices. And then August 10th, 2026 is the GSA's deadline to submit charges to the Napa County Auditor's Office for placement on tax bills. So that July 10th deadline is really the backstop here, and that's sort of fed into this timeline. That's why we're gathering information now with an eye on finalizing that information in July, finalizing the rate in late July, and then submitting that on August 10th to the Auditor's Office. I think that's all I had for you. As Jameson mentioned earlier, we want to take questions. A couple things to note. I mentioned that I was going to put this back on the screen. We have some resources here for more information. There's a website URL there, a contact phone number, an email address. These are the same ones that were on the postcards that were mailed out. And I wanted to note one more time that we do have an additional community meeting scheduled for July 1st, 2026. So coming up here in a couple weeks, and that will be from 5:30 p.m. to 7 p.m.
That's great. Thank you so much, Ryan. So yeah, but that's the conclusion of our presentation slides. As I said, that was perfectly on time. We have an hour left in the webinar to take questions from anybody in the public. I did want to point out, well, if you are interested in asking a question, please raise your hand and one of our clerks will unmute you and call your name and allow you to address the group. Looks like, oh, we had a hand and it went back down. While people are thinking about that, I'll just point out the demonstration that Ryan just did for us about how to determine if you're in the subbasin. To get to that website, in order to do that, you can go see the site here in the middle, www.napacounty.gov/3983. If you go to that site, that is our Groundwater Sustainability Fee homepage. And from there, you go into the frequently asked questions. I believe it's the very first frequently asked question for all three of the user groups. And it says, how do I know if my property is in the subbasin? And there is a link to that online public map. So looks like we have a couple hands up. So clerks, I'll let you take it away and
Thank you, Jameson. Margarita?
Hi, yes, I have a question about alternative water source if recycled water qualifies as that. And recycled from our own production and or water that we are purchasing from the Napa San.
Yeah, so generally speaking, recycled water does count as an alternative water source. If it is water that you're reusing from your system, that may get a little more complicated because that may be at least partially groundwater. But yes, generally, recycled water does count. And this is where we understand that situations are going to be likely different for a lot of people. And we're going to kind of take this on a case-by-case basis and work with you to figure out whether you meet that threshold and whether that's appropriate.
And maybe I missed that. Did you share where do we submit those applications for a fee reduction or not?
Yeah,
You
so
said the deadline is July 10th, but where can we do that?
Yeah, so that's the email address on the screen here, or the phone number. And that information, more information on that is on the URL that's on the screen as well. But you reach out directly to the county via that phone number or that email address.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Of course, thank you.
Michelle?
Thank you. Just a quick question. The fee waivers, are those only for self-supplied users, or is there a way for farmers to submit a fee waiver? And then on a side note, I just want to say one of my members reached out to your info email, and Brendan got back to him with a very thorough response. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Michelle. Yeah, so to your first question, the fee waivers are only for self-supplied. So this was something that was established by the GSA board. I believe it was early fall when the first discussions around that happened, and then it was finalized at the December board meeting. But that is based on rural residential users specifically. And again, it relates to that AMI, that area median income. So that is just for the self-supplied users.
Okay, and I don't actually know this, but if could you possibly have a self-supplied user and an ag property owned by the same people?
Absolutely. You can have a vineyard that also has a residence on it. Thankfully, as we were getting this up and running, it became apparent that Napa County has excellent county use codes pertaining to those types of situations. So the use codes tend to indicate when there's maybe two things like that happening on a property. So absolutely, it's possible that you have some vines and that you could still qualify for the self-supplied waiver.
So, but you'd only get the self-supplied, like you'd still have to pay all of the vineyard fees.
Yes, it would only be for that parcel fee that the waiver is available for, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Of course.
Heather?
Yeah, can you hear me? Can you repeat the definition of dry farm?
Yeah, absolutely. Here, let me scroll back to that slide. We are using the official California Sustainable Wine Growing Alliance definition here. So it's a technique that relies solely on utilizing the water naturally present in the soil, captured by the rain, to meet the needs of an established vine without irrigation. In a Mediterranean climate with dry summers, this requires capturing winter and spring rain.
Thank you.
Of course.
And Heather, I would just add, if you have any doubts, please reach out to us, email us. We want to make sure that anybody who is dry farm, we realize they're different. Everybody has a little different idea about what dry farming is. But please, if you have any doubt, or we don't want to exclude anybody, so please email us.
Jill?
Yes. This is Jim and Jill. How do we find out the number of farmed acres from the county? They just give on our tax bill our gross acreage.
Yeah, which includes our home and our driveway and our garden. That's not all planted acreage.
Absolutely. So it is, first of all, you're correct that it's a sort of a separate record keeping that the assessor's office has specifically for planted acreage. Generally, my understanding is that is based on what was submitted to them in the past about the number of planted acreage. But if you are unsure, we have that data set from the assessor. As I mentioned, we're going to be getting an updated data set in the next several weeks. But I would reach out to the county, to the email address on the screen here, and we can help clear that up for you in terms of what we have. What we have, again, comes from the assessor database, but we can share that with you.
Okay, thank you.
Of course.
George?
I have kind of two questions. Our acreage is in the MST area, and back in 2000, when we got our water permits and the acreage permits for the erosion, does this fee now negate that amount of water that was supplied on the water permit?
No, it does not.
Okay, and how do you still monitor that?
Well, if you have requirements under your permit that was provided at that time, you would still be submitting your pump usage. So really nothing would change about that. And only a fairly small sliver of the MST also overlaps with the Napa Valley Subbasin. So it's entirely possible that you're in the MST, but not in the subbasin. So again, I would encourage you to go to the website and look at our GIS tool to determine if your parcel is or is not. And again, if you have any questions, we're happy to help you with it. Email us or call us at the number on the screen and we'll help you figure it out.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Courtney?
Hello. I have two questions. One is, and maybe you guys already answered this, but if you do not have a well on your property at all, are you still subject to this, or is it the same as dry farming? I mean, if there's like a property that you're irrigating based off of rainwater collection on another property due to a water sharing agreement, how does that work?
Yeah, great question. Oh, sorry. I heard an echo. I thought you said something else.
Oh, no.
Yeah, great question. So really what is in question here is the use. So if there's a nuance there. So if you are, say, using you're irrigating crops on a parcel with well water from the parcel next door, that wouldn't change this, right? The irrigation is happening in the subbasin, and it's being applied to the crops. However, if it's rainwater, I think you mentioned rainwater, and that constitutes a majority of the irrigation, that would come into play, right? So really is it groundwater that comes from the subbasin is kind of the defining factor there.
Yeah, and I think what gets complicated about this, and I know I'm probably not speaking just for myself, is I think a lot of other growers besides me will use a combination of water. So I have sites where we use Napa sanitation water and we also use some groundwater. And is there any type of, I don't know, like system to, and we don't 100% use well water on every property.
Yeah, I understand that, and I think we are prepared to kind of take that case by case and try to help you understand exactly where you could fit into this. So if you're getting, sanitation water, trying to understand where that fits into this is something that the county can help with.
Okay, so would you recommend that we reach out and try to have a meeting separately about this then?
Yeah, so the phone number and email address on the screen are intended for people to directly reach out. Again, we're speaking in somewhat broad strokes today because we know that there are going to be unique circumstances, and that's what this contact information is for, is to have those more detailed discussions about specific situations.
Okay, you guys are gonna be having a lot of those. And then the other question I have is, is the Napa tax collector, which would be also the Vine reports, which I'm assuming you're basically pulling off the Vine reports. Are they going to be collecting new information every year on this and then basing the fees on the yearly or every 3-year Vine report? Or are you actually just going off of planted acreage January 1st, 2026?
So the baseline data set is the assessor's planted acreage data. We have been, as we've worked on this, we were using last year's. We are going to receive the most recent one, which, as I mentioned, is updated through January 1st of this year. But there is this call out right now to try to understand changes that have occurred since then. So we're kind of working with both, right? We realize the assessor's data that has the planted acreage is a great resource. I mentioned earlier, many counties don't have that. But we want to make sure that we're accounting for any changes that may not be reflected in that data, especially with the lapse in time since that was last updated.
Yeah, because it is something that obviously with agriculture, you're tearing out vineyard and replanting all the time. So it's like a yearly change.
Absolutely, yeah, and those are the changes that we want to try to capture here, and that will be something that will be in place in future years as well. If changes are not reflected in the assessor data, we want to hear about them.
Okay, thank you so much for answering my questions.
Of course, thanks for asking.
I think that's also a good plug to be sure to report any changes in your cropped acreage to the assessor as it's happening. I know we just mentioned that January 1st deadline, but that's really helpful if you guys report that up front, just so that we're making sure that when we get the download from them, it's the most up to date, but understand that it's constantly changing and evolving.
Jeff?
Jeff, can you hear us? I think you're unmuted.
How about now?
There we go.
You got me now?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Following up on Courtney's question, so say you are using recycled water or surface water, and in your presentation you noted that the GSA will follow up wanting you to substantiate that. Do you have any idea what that data set would look like, or how you do that?
Yeah, I think it depends to some degree on what we're talking about. So if it's surface water, we would want to understand or know, have verification of the surface water rights, and on how much of that surface water was used. Of course, that calculation then kind of becomes, well, then how many acres are being irrigated and how much water use is occurring. So a couple factors there, but I think the baseline would be verification of the surface water right and how much is being used. With recycled water, I think a similar type of thing. We would, if you're purchasing recycled water, we'd want to see some proof of that purchase and understand the amount.
Okay, so kind of that would be specific. Ask groundwater at countyofnapa.org and have that conversation, and they say, yeah, we want to see this and that kind of thing.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Correct.
Great.
And just a reminder that is only if those alternative water sources are more than 50% of your total irrigation water.
Sure. Yep.
Okay.
Thank you.
Jim?
Yes, following up on Jeff, is there a way, I mean, we have surface water and groundwater, like most vineyards in the valley. Are irrigation records going to be sufficient to ascertain that 50% rule, or are we going to need meters on that?
I think it to some degree depends on the situation, but if you can substantiate an amount of, say, surface water use, that seems like it could reasonably account for a majority or more than half of the irrigation. I think that's really the standard. If it's cutting it close, there may be a need to better understand or get a little more data in place there.
Okay, sounds like we need to get some irrigation records. This may be a stretch, but we have a couple of ranches. They do have wells, but they are connected to the Napa City water, the line that goes along the railroad tracks, and we have one ranch north of Yountville and another one in Oakville. How does that work?
Yeah. So, and are you speaking to planted crop acreage on those parcels?
Yes.
Yeah, so a couple things there. One, I mentioned earlier that for self-supplied users, we exempted everyone within water service areas because the assumption is you're connected to the system, your household is connected to the system. We did not do the same for planted crop acreage, parcels with planted crop acreage, because in many cases you may have city water for certain uses, but you're not using it to irrigate. If you are using city water or water system water to irrigate crops, that is something that we would like you to let us know. And in that case, if that is what you're using, you may be eligible to just pay that base rate and not that additional $60 rate on top of it.
Okay. Would that 50% rule kick in as well on those ranches?
Yes, it would. Yeah. So if the city water, similar to surface water or another water source, if the city water is accounting for a
Okay.
majority of the irrigation, yes, you could be bumped down to that base rate.
Okay. It's too expensive to
Sure.
use more than 50%. Thank
Sure,
you.
and that's sort of baked into some of our assumptions. But if that is what's happening, we want to know about it. Of
Great. Thank you.
course.
Deborah? Okay, it looks like she put her hand down, and that was everyone.
Okay. Well, we're always happy if we get to the part where we've answered everybody's questions.
Actually, Jameson, I got her
There's-
back on, so just
We
one
got her
moment.
back. Okay.
Deborah, go ahead.
Deborah, we can't hear you. If you might be muted. We still can't quite hear you. If you can hear us.
So I guess I'm out of luck.
There we
Now
go.
we
Now I
can
can
hear
hear
you. Now we can
Okay.
hear you.
So my question is this: I just have a private well, and the minute I saw that notice about a fee applying to my well, the thought that I jumped to was, are you eventually planning to monitor water usage on a private well?
That's a good question. Go ahead, Ryan.
Well, yeah, sure. And then Jameson, you may add on to that. So obviously I don't work directly for the county. I've been hired by the county for this effort. In my conversations around this fee, there have not been detailed discussions about requiring meters. That's really partly why we came up with sort of this three-part structure, right? Was because we don't have that information, and we knew we weren't going to get it anytime particularly soon. The other thing I would note is Sigma in general does authorize GSAs to have mandatory meters on non-de minimis users. So they cannot require meters for like rural residential users. They can require meters for other types of users. But again, I don't think that that is currently being planned. And that's again why we set the fee up this way, because we couldn't base it off of exact water use. We just don't have that data at this time. And I'll let the county chime in for more specifics maybe.
Yeah, that's it. I was just going to say we are blessed to receive a lot of data submitted to us voluntarily, both groundwater level data. There are a number of users around the subbasin and the whole county that permit my staff to come out periodically and measure the elevation water in their well, and that information and data is really helpful in feeding our model and our estimates of usage. So if anybody's interested, they certainly can either pumped data or groundwater level data, which we would collect for you, but that's not in the works at present. And as Ryan said, it's not permissible for non-de minimis users anyway.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and it doesn't look like we have anyone else's hands raised.
Okay. I'm tempted to give it another minute here. Maybe somebody's on the fence if they have a question, but I also don't want to hold anybody. So with that, I think we can conclude. Only other thing, I was making some notes for myself. I think this is probably clear to everybody because nobody asked. The rates that Ryan shared in the presentation are rates per year, not monthly rates for anybody that might have been tempted to think that. Talked about the fee waiver. Yeah, so the only other point I would make is that he mentioned many points where we were asking for information from you related to dry farming and alternative water sources or the fee waiver to get to us by July 10th. And there's no like claim form, if you will. It's not a complicated process. It's really just a matter of emailing or calling us and interacting with my staff with questions and so forth. So it's not like an application. It's meant to be as simple and easy as possible. So don't worry that it's going to be an onerous process. But with that, I don't see anybody else has raised their hands. If you think of anything afterward, you've got our phone number and our email. Please feel free to reach out to us afterward. You can, of course, if you think of something else, you can come to our second community meeting, which is on July 1st from 5:30 to 7 in the evening. Same thing, all virtual. The registration link for that meeting is on our website, which is the address right in the middle of the screen. And unless Brendan or Nick or Ryan have any final thoughts.
Just that I encourage for the folks that ask questions about alternative water or purchasing recycled water, please feel free to email us and start a conversation.
Yes. All right. Well, thank you, Ryan and staff, and thank you to participants, and have a good rest of your afternoon.
Thanks, everybody.